Uh, Sorry to disappoint all the artists. I'm here to talk about game production. I am a producer, and I'll just jump right into. Can everyone see that? Actually, looks like I don't want to be in the way. I'll take a step back. So a little bit about me before we jump in to my presentation. So 41 as of last month. I've been in games for just about the last 10 years almost. Before that, I started off as a programmer. Many years. You probably weren't even born, some of you, I'm sure. And then I transitioned over to like product, program management, project management from 2003 onward. And that actually really helped me become or get into game production and transition to it very easily. I'll explain why in a bit. I've worked on a lot of major franchises since I've been in games. I consider myself extremely lucky and fortunate. I worked on Madden NFL. That's where I started working on that for Madden 12 and 13. I was responsible for franchise mode there. I worked on the Destiny franchise, specifically Rise of Iron for Destiny 1 and then Destiny 2 and the first 2 expansions that you saw on there. And then more recently, I'm Forza. I work on Forza Horizon. I'm the executive producer there for that franchise. We launched that game back in October, and it's been an amazing game. If you haven't had a chance to play it, you should. Artists would definitely appreciate that. So that's a bit about me. Some other notes. Married, have 3 wonderful girls who also love games. We're a gaming family. My 11-year-old has already started working on games with me at home using RGB Maker Pro. She writes graphic novels. We turn those into mini RGB games. So, RPG games. Sorry. Yeah. All right. So, if you notice the title at the beginning, I started off with servant leadership as a title, which I think is really key to being not just a leader in any company, but also in production. It's extremely important. So what is servant leadership? As you can see here, it was a term coined way back in the day by a guy who's been long dead. But a servant leader is someone who is a servant first, has the responsibility to be in the world, and contributes to the well-being of people and community, and that emphasis is mine. As a game producer, the well-being of people and the community, which is really your team, the teams that you work with, and your customers, very important. I've been an Agile practitioner for a long time, since 2001. And actually, this is one of the core tenets of being an Agile practitioner. And when I say Agile practitioner, I don't mean Scrum or Kanban, any of those terms. You guys probably would use that in your day-to-day school studies here. Those are Agile project management methodologies. I'm talking about actual Agile core principles. So I've been studying servant leadership for a long time now because I've been in leadership roles before games, since I've been in games, and to me it's very important. When I'm hiring a producer, these are the traits that I'm looking for. And you could read a lot more about these at scrum.org, but for me, a producer, servant leader focuses on building a foundation of trust, collaborating with their team, with others, bringing people together, is an empathetic person. That's actually the number 1 trait that I look for when I hire producers is empathy. They care about ethics, and they have a very caring behavior. And when I say ethics, I don't mean morals. Those are 2 different things. I actually mean good, solid ethics, business ethics, foundational customer ethics, things like that. And they're a humble person, and they're social and situationally aware. It's extremely important. As a producer, you have to measure the pulse of your team and the people that you're working with. You have to get to know those people at kind of a personal level. Whether you're friends or not doesn't matter. It's knowing what makes a person tick. their good days, their bad days, how you can help them succeed and put them in a place to be successful. So. All right. So this is a question I get asked all the time. I was at GDC again this year. It was my 8th straight GDC. I did a lot of mentorship programs with IGDA while I was there, and also just random membership interviews or invites that I got from LinkedIn, because I usually blast out on LinkedIn. I'm going to GDC if you want to talk production. Hit me up, I'll find some time. And I get asked this question a lot by people who are not game producers. Sometimes by people who are game producers, and have been game producers for a long time. If you try Google, you're going to get like 20 different links with 20 different answers. So that's not super helpful. If you ask any random producer at any company what they do, they're all going to give you different answers as well. Expectations vary by company, by project, even sometimes within the role of the team that you're in as a producer. Like if you're in a very discipline-focused team, or if it's a cross-functional team, expectations can be different. Some are very creative, some are very technical, some are generalists in essence. Most people refer to us as the glue, or the people that get stuff done. I don't like that answer. I see that answer all the time. It was actually an interesting Kotaku article, I think like 4 years ago, maybe 5, you could look it up, where Jason Schreier interviewed somebody, a producer at a certain affinity down in Austin. And that person kind of gave what their day-to-day looked like, what their thoughts were on being a producer. And TLDR was basically that. We get stuff done. And I don't approach production that way. In my mind, my view is that we are the ones who enable others to get things done. So we actually don't get anything done. So that's a secret of production. As I mentioned before, in the second point, responsibilities vary too, depending on your level in your career. What a game producer does and what they're responsible and accountable for, early level versus like somebody who's a lead or somebody who's an EP, it changes drastically. It's not even the same job, to be honest with you. So it's very broad. Discipline expertise isn't required, except when it is. You see a lot of companies that are hiring, for example, say like a narrative producer, and they want somebody who's only worked with narrative people, like ever. You know how many producers there are in the world that are like that? Not very many. Same with cinematics, sometimes with art, sometimes tech producers, etc. And what they're usually looking for there is like a deeper level of understanding for the craft of that discipline, without actually being a day-to-day contributor for that team within that discipline. So that is a very deep expertise that can pigeonhole you in your career. A lot of people liken producers to project managers, but depending on what you're doing, you're actually more of a product manager than a project manager. If you're working in mobile, actually a lot of times, a producer is not just really managing the day-to-day schedule, but they're actually responsible for the product roadmap, the actual overall business as it relates to their feature, or maybe even the game as a whole. So, which is very different. A lot of times in agile shops in the industry, there's a lot of game companies out there that say they run agile. They really don't. But on paper, they say they do. And they like to put producers in at Scrum Masters. But a lot of times, those same producers are product owners, or sometimes they're one or the other. And I've seen this happen all the time. And so in that sense, we're filling multiple roles within the team, because at the end of the day, we're enablers. We're trying to help the team get stuff done and drive forward. So we take on a variety of hats. And then producers come from all kinds of backgrounds and experiences. There is no education for this yet. I was actually talking today to a colleague of mine who he opened up a school, a master's program at the University of Austin in Texas for game design, programming, etc. And they had a track for production, but not an actual degree program. I'm like, why didn't you do that? Like, because there's a lot. I've worked at many different companies, and we always want to hire low-level, entry-level producers, but they're hard to find because they're not taught that in school. They take like 1 or 2 classes as they're taking design or art, etc. And they're not really ready to manage a team, a feature, a project. So, all right. So I know I didn't answer your question with that. I mean, I just listed off a bunch of random things. So I'm going to tell you what I think a game producer is. And I know this is going to be very much cheating to you guys, but to me, a producer is these things that I mentioned in the first slide that I showed you guys. They're servant leaders. They do all these things with varying levels of expertise, but this, in essence, is a core producer for me. So we're servant leaders, and games cannot ship without us. I mean, they can, if you're like a one-person game shop or whatever. But even if you take a step back and you're working on an indie title, and it's just you or maybe like a group of 5 people, somebody is doing all of these things, whether or not you know it, on the team and driving to get those things done. Even if you're doing it by yourself, a lot of at the end of the day, you have stakeholders that you're working with in order to get your game out there, right? Maybe investors, maybe different endpoints, maybe different platforms like Steam or Epic Store, etc., those kinds of things, or iOS, Android. At the end of the day, you're having to communicate with those various customers and those various stakeholders, and you're doing these things even if you're doing it alone. So you might not just realize it yet. So with that, what really is a game producer? Oh, sorry, that was there we go. Forgot that GIF was in there, my bad. And let me move on. So what skills do we need as a game producer? Depending on your level and the hiring manager, they're always going to answer something different. But I'm more interested in the soft skills of game production and treating game production as an actual craft. Hard skills can be taught, project management, product management, even things like communication over time, etc. But there's a lot of things underneath that come with the individual. Some people are naturally good at it and some people are not. Things like empathy, which I mentioned before. And this is empathy for both your team, the teams you're working with, and the customer. To me, it's the number one skill, as I've mentioned, and I test for it. I actually have a scenario when I interview people that I give them during the loop. It's a very quick scenario, usually like maybe 10 minutes long. And from that 10-minute scenario and what the person's derived out of that scenario and the feedback they've given me, I can tell how empathetic they actually are with the team. The scenario is basically a dysfunctional team concept. On the surface, it might not seem that dysfunctional, but if you actually dig into it, it's a very dysfunctional team. Communication across all levels of a company. So communication for a producer is super important. Obviously, this is something that I've hired producers that are introverts. They struggle with this part, mostly because they feel comfortable with their team eventually, especially if it's a small team. But they struggle with outward communication, face-to-face communication with other people they don't work with on a day-to-day basis, and that's fine. That's something that you learn and get better at over time, you feel more comfortable with over time. But communication is really important as a producer, especially as you grow as a producer across all levels of your company or studio. Because eventually, if you become a lead or if you become an EP, the amount of communication that you have to do and to all the different types of people that you're communicating with is staggering. So having great written and verbal communication is key. And being able to present is not bad either. Collaboration within your team. For me, the big thing here, and this also, I have a scenario for this when I interview people too. Being able to bring people together to solve a problem, and and also realize at the same time that you are not the one solving the problem a lot of times. You're bringing people and experts together to solve the problem, to solve sometimes their differences too. You're an enabler, right? But it's your job to bring people together. It's so key, being a producer, to be great at collaboration and to do it very much willingly and to be proactive about it. Transparency. So with transparency, raising red flags as you see them, not shying away. This is not just talking to your manager and telling them how things are going, but also making sure that there's transparency both ways, from your team getting the information that they need in order for them to be empowered, in order for them to be successful, as well as bubbling information up and across, and working with others, giving them also the information that they need in order to, be successful, make changes to their plans, or to accommodate things that your team is working on, as well as things like risks, which I'm going to get into in a minute. Being very transparent about where you're at with that and how your team is dealing with it, mitigating it, is also key. So, situational awareness. This is a really interesting one. I mentioned this before, but being able to get a good pulse for your team and each individual on there. What's going on with them? How are things going on in their lives down at a personal level, which can impact how they work, impact how they react to others, and also too, not just even from a personality, behavioral standpoint, but also from just the broader project, right? There might be dependencies that you have on other teams as a producer, and in big projects, this is always going to be the case. And you have to be situationally aware of how that team or those teams are doing, and how a project overall is trending, even if you're just mainly focused on your feature area. Because all those things at the end of the day have an impact and add risk to your own personal project, right? Your own area, and at the same time, all those things could impact the people on your team. So to be cognizant of everything that's going on at all times, it's like being omnipotent, but you're not. So you just work really hard and do the best you can. Risk management and identification. This is like the biggest issue in game development. How many people read the Anthem article on Kotaku? Okay, yeah, pretty good amount. Very long read, right? I know people who worked on that project, who still work on that project. And this is the biggest issue with projects like that, any kind of projects overall in games. I've seen this come up so many times over the years. I'll give you a really good example of one that impacted me and my team personally. This was several years back when I was working on Madden. We presented a plan to redesign and redevelop franchise mode from the ground up for Madden. Madden had the same franchise mode for about 20 years prior to me running that team. And we wanted to change that. We wanted to take it in a new direction. So we presented a plan. It was about a 2-year development plan to get it somewhat of the way closer to where NBA 2K was with their career mode and MLB The Show. And coming out of the meeting, leadership at the studio was like, that is an amazing plan. That design is outstanding. We're really excited about it. But you don't have 2 years to do it. You have 1. And that was really challenging. It's like, okay, well, we didn't come up with a plan for 1 year. And so the feedback that we got was, do it in a year or don't do it at all. And we really wanted to do it. And at the same time, I really wanted to be protective of my team. So we developed a plan that was aggressive but realistic, and we thought would end up getting rejected, to be frank. And that plan basically took my team from 12 people to 38. We didn't even have that many seats at Tiburon for that many new people. And so, but we presented it anyway because we wanted to do it, and this was the most realistic plan possible. And I figured they would come back and say, oh, you know what? No, that's too aggressive. It's got too much risk. There's no way we can hire that many people. Now forget it. We're not going to do it. But instead, surprisingly, the feedback we got was, this sounds amazing. Here's a blank check. Go hire what you need. Oh, and by the way, we just signed an agreement with the city of Austin to open up a sports studio there, so you can hire the people there. And that presented a whole new challenge that wasn't accounted for in our plan, which was branching this out to multiple locations. Needless to say, it was a very risky proposition, one that we carefully managed throughout that cycle, and we shipped it. Connected Careers in Madden 13 within a year, and with a lot of crunch, unfortunately. Project management, another key skill for a producer, and this is like at all levels, similar to risk. Good producers, especially at the entry level, outside of amazing soft skills, this is like the one skill that they don't really have yet, but the one skill that you can develop without actually going into games, right? In terms of at least knowledge, general education. There's courses at universities for project management. You could go and get, not the PMP, but like the next level underneath that. You can learn about project management. This is the one thing when you become a producer at entry level that's going to help you succeed and stand out. Because to be perfectly honest, I've met a lot of associate producers that come into studios over the years, and most of them have pretty good soft skills. They work well with their teams. They do not know how to manage a project. So, and then as a result, it creates even more risk for them and for their team, and it sets them up to not succeed. So, and then I think this is the last one, product management. This is another one of those skills that you can go out. You could take business classes. You could learn about how to manage a product, how to develop a product roadmap, how to manage a P&L, profit and loss statement, how to manage a budget. A lot of these things come from a product management background, and as a producer, having that knowledge and skill maybe is not going to be extremely useful at the very entry level, but again, in order to really stand out and grow, having that background and knowing what higher level producers are talking about, and then also getting involved, it helps when you have knowledge in this space. All right, so with that, I'm going to transition to my journey as a producer over the years in games, just so you can see mainly like the differences across the various companies I worked at, the roles that I had, that kind of tie back into that, like, hey, what does a game producer do thing? It's so wide and varied. But there are some underlying themes. So when I was on Madden NFL at Tiburon, the things that I was mainly accountable there were franchise mode connected career. So that was my feature area, right? And that feature area had 4 teams, all of them cross-disciplinary. So it was a pretty big group, as I mentioned, 38 people for year 2. Our goal was really just to deliver a great experience to our customers and drive Metacritic for Madden. So, which was, you hear stories of in the game industry about companies, studios, etc., caring about Metacritic, wanting to achieve a certain number because that helps with sales or recognition, etc. And this was true for Madden. Madden had grown really stale from a Metacritic standpoint. It was on a downward trend for several years, and so when I got in there and to take over franchise mode, they're like, hey, this is the #1 played mode on Madden, and that's still true today. This is a Metacritic driver that we've been kind of ignoring a little bit. Whatever we do in this space, it needs to raise the Metacritic profile of Madden. And so a lot of the decisions that we were doing were very customer focused to help get there. So, health of my team. This was on my annual review every year. It was one of my stated goals, not something that was mandated. But for me, I was personally accountable for making sure that the health of my team was great. And outside of conversations with 38 different people on a week-to-week basis, the real way to measure it is the team health surveys that EA would send out every quarter. How my team measured up against other teams within the studio and other teams within EA. And for me, I wanted to be above that average. significantly above. And so that was one of the things that I was always tracking and working on. People management. This is really interesting. As a producer, very rarely, if you ever get into managing careers, very rarely will you actually get to manage the career of a non-producer, unless you're working at maybe a really small studio. Tiburon is not a small studio. There's like 700 people there. Madden specifically, I think there was like 125, 150. But with that said, my team, the way it was structured at the time, the producers at EA managed everybody who was on their team. So I had an insane amount of direct reports, as you can imagine, especially since I didn't have any producers that were working under me to help me out. I was one producer for all those people. So for the first time in my career, because I had come from software where I did have direct reports and I was managing their careers, but they were product managers, program managers, project managers. I knew those areas. I could manage those careers. Here I was managing artists, designers, programmers, and then of course the slices of those, like UI artists, UI engineers, 3D designers, etc. Like highly specialized people. I had no idea how to do that. And I remember going into my manager's office, I think like 2 months in, and saying, "Hey, Sean, I need you to help me. I don't know how to manage a designer. Like, I don't know anything about design. I mean, I know product design, not game design. So I'm going to fail this person if I'm not helped here, if I'm not brought up to speed on what a good designer looks like, what a good artist looks like, a good engineer at EA, etc." And so I started working with various discipline leads to understand what good looks like for a person in those disciplines, which was a tremendous amount of work for me. But I'm so passionate about people management and career development that I took it upon myself to do this to ensure that I was setting those individuals up to succeed and they were getting the support that they needed. Even if and I work with an art director day in, day out. We sit right next to each other. We're talking every day for Forza Horizon. And he'll say things, and the artist I used to work for, will say things about like a blade of grass on the field, etc., that kind of stuff. And I'm just like, okay, but like, is that blade of grass selling like 1 million more units? I don't know what you're trying to tell me. And so I wasn't going to be able to talk to an artist or a designer, etc., in those terms, but understanding their pain points and how they wanted to grow, and then giving them the support structure in order to do so. That's what I was doing. So, and then multi-location collaboration. I mentioned the Austin studio there. I opened that up, but I was working out of Orlando. My main team was there. We were seeding this team in Austin, and we were working with a vendor out in Nova Scotia, Canada, about 11 engineers there to help build this new mode. And it was surprisingly at the time at Tiburon, they had never done anything like that before. So there was no infrastructure in place to support multi-studio collaboration on a feature. Usually when a vendor was selected to go do a thing, they would do the thing in isolation and then bring it back and be like, here you go, here's the thing. And then they would just take it. But in this point, we were doing active co-development across all those studios. So that was really tough for me. It meant, setting up the infrastructure in terms of everyone at their desks everywhere had to have cameras, had to have headsets, so we could talk via video whenever we're collaborating, because there's no replacement for face-to-face communication. You could fire off 1 billion emails, and a lot of those things get out of context. But if you're actually seeing the person that you're speaking with, and you're trying to collaborate and discuss a feature and how you're going to approach it, etc., that kind of stuff, like, that can only really be done successfully face-to-face. So that, coupled with me as the producer for the team, flying out to all these locations on a monthly basis even, it was really difficult for me, as at the time too, I had one kid and another one that was just born. I didn't see that kid very much, the second kid, for a year. And then the last thing was transparency. So at EA, despite what you might hear, everybody does know what's going on at all times. the information that might be given might be inaccurate, but they're really big on transparency, especially when you're doing a really big feature like this, or working on a new game title. That transparency goes all the way to corporate in Redwood Shores. So there were sessions. John Riticello was the CEO of EA while I was there. He's now CEO at Unity. But yeah, I mean, I remember going into, well, finding out that I was going to present to him like literally the night before he was going to show up, because he wanted to know more about the franchise mode designs and that kind of stuff. So that happened all the time, like to various levels and areas within broader EA, as well as within our studio. So, all right. And then, so after shipping Madden 12 and 13, I decided to go to EA Montreal. And for me, that was a completely different challenge, because shipping a feature in Madden is awesome. Madden's a big AAA game, very well known, very popular. There's many people who go there and they stay there for ages, partly because they don't want to move out of Orlando and there are no other game studios there. But aside from that, they really love working there. For me, I really wanted to be challenged in actually leading a business. I hadn't really done that before. When I was working in software, I was responsible for like a lot of product initiatives, huge features, sometimes the delivery of a product, but not like running what I would say a business. So then I went to EA Montreal. I had an opportunity to go there and be, in essence, the studio GM. So I went and did that. I knew nothing about mobile development. I actually did not even like mobile games. And so I went there as a challenge of learning how to run business, learning about mobile game development, and trying to be, and also at the same time, trying to rebuild a culture there that had taken a huge hit over the years. So things that I was accountable for there were multiple game projects simultaneously. Now, mobile games, as you know, they're smaller, right? They're not AAA games. You could kick out a mobile game with like a few people, 5 people. It's not the EA way of doing things. It's usually like 30, 50, sometimes 150. I won't name names of studios, but sometimes they get that big for a mobile game, which is kind of crazy. At our studio, we had roughly about 70-ish people, and we would work on 3 to 5 game projects at the same time. And there were a variety of projects. Some of them were new IP. Some of them were co-development with other studios. We worked on the infamous Dungeon Keeper, which I don't know if you guys remember that launch. No, I hear some people like, yeah, that was not good. That was not our fault. It was Mythic's fault. That's why they're not around anymore. We worked with them as best we could though and gave them as much advice as possible. But so we did a lot of co-development. We did a lot of new tech development as well in the mobile space. And we worked with a lot of different studios. So the multi-studio collaboration portion that I mentioned at Tiburon, at Montreal was amplified. We worked with every mobile studio within EA around the world. So there was a lot of travel, a lot of meetings and weird hours during the day or night because of this. And as a result, our group, which was the team in Montreal, there was a team in Hyderabad, India, St. Petersburg, Russia, Romania, and then LA. That was our group within the mobile, within the broader mobile group at EA. And we had to work as kind of one unit, and it was really led out of Montreal. So that was really complicated. And not only that, but the way we worked with them at times was in a publishing model, both internally and externally. So, for example, Tetris Blitz. I don't know if you guys know that game. That was developed out of EA Hyderabad at the time. And but it was managed and published by our team in Montreal. And so for our team there, that was a new concept as well. We had never done publishing before. I had never worked in that capacity either. So there was a lot of learnings there and trying to grow a great publishing team on top of the great game teams that we have there already. I was also responsible for the health of my studio. So for getting even a 38-man team, I was responsible for the health of the studio. This was actually not a metric that I was personally trying to track. This was a mandate because the reason I was brought there was because the health of the studio was the worst at EA, and the EA thought I was a great team builder. They soon realized that wasn't the case. But no, I'm just kidding. I did a pretty decent job there. But there was a lot of retention issues, a lot of employee morale problems. They had 2 massive layoffs, within a year of me arriving there, and they had a lot of career development and growth issues there. So people were basically in the same role at the same level for 5 years, and that's not good, right? My goal was, and the company's goal was to make sure that it was more in line with the rest of the studios, and building a culture of excellence there. Now, culture of excellence was a really interesting thing because when I was hired, they're like, "We need you to bring a culture of excellence to Montreal." And I'm like, "Cool. What does that mean?" And they're like, "We don't know. Figure it out." and so I worked with my studio leads there, and we were thinking about this for a few months. And then we finally figured out, you know what? Culture of excellence is not like the health of the studio, right? It's within EA for us, it needs to be like a thing that we can carve out and say, we are the people that other studios go to for this thing. And we're excellent at it. And everybody needs us for this thing. We already had a lot of Android expertise at the studio at the time, which no one else at EA had. I don't know if most people don't know this, but back in those days, EA would develop games for iOS and hardly ever for Android. And if they did do it for Android, it was a port that they paid somebody else to do. And then they would not really touch it again. We had Android experts in our studio, and we wanted to really develop that and build up that culture as being the Android experts within EA, and we did that. We did it actually fairly quickly, and it wasn't even just development. It was also business management. How to succeed in shipping a game on Android and being successful worldwide. It's different than an iOS, right? And so those are things that we took a lot of pride in developing and actually becoming known as the de facto experts on. So I'm going to jump to my time now at Horizon before I get into some Q&A. But I skipped over on purpose my time at Bungie. And that's because I didn't want to scare anybody. Bungie's an amazing place to work. It's the best place I've ever worked at in my life. But what I did at Bungie would be 5 slides of bullet points because it was so broad and encompassing. Not even just what I was accountable for and responsible for my teams and feature areas, etc. But there was so many studio-wide initiatives, production initiatives that I worked directly on for culture or for production all up, diversity and inclusion, etc. Like that. Yeah, there was a lot going on there. And so I was like, well, I'll just gloss over that one. But my journey takes me today is as the EP for Forza Horizon. It's very interesting because looking back at my time in Montreal, I was responsible for the business as kind of like a small business owner, right? And for Horizon, it's really the same thing, but like a franchise. And I don't run the studio; I'm responsible for this product line. So things like its budget, revenue, how it grows with users, with customers, how it grows with revenue, how it grows to reach our users in various areas we don't today. That's all things that I'm responsible for, as well as how we connect into the broader Xbox initiatives at Microsoft. We have, despite what people have heard or think from the outside, we game studios within Microsoft have quite a lot of autonomy, and we don't have a lot of mandates to do specific things or certain things. Old Microsoft, yes, but new Microsoft, with Phil Spencer leading the charge, reporting directly to Satya, no, which is great. The health of my team, which is a small team at the studio, because we're a publishing team, is really important to me because we have a lot of different initiatives that we're working on at the same time. The main one being that we are an enabler for Playground Games. So Playground Games, they're the developer in the UK that does the day in, day out development for Forza Horizon. And we shield them before they were a part of Microsoft, and now since we acquired them in May. We shield them from the greater distractions of working at Microsoft, a company as big as Microsoft, with a huge marketing arm, right, and publishing arm. So, we make sure that they're focused on building a great product because that's what they want to focus on, and then we take a lot of the other things that you would normally expect a leadership team to end up taking. But their health, even though I'm not at that studio, and I'm not technically responsible for that team or that studio, their health is just as important to me as my team's health. And so there's a lot of things, a lot of decisions that we end up trying to make on a day-to-day basis, conversations that I have with various different parts of the gaming org that want to do certain things with our game, future instances of our game, etc. And one of the first things I always ask myself is, how does this negatively impact Playground and what they're doing today? And if the answer is it negatively impacts them, I usually reply back with, we're not doing the thing that you want, because it's gonna end up, either putting something at risk, or they might end up having a crunch, or any number of different factors. But I look out for their health, just as I do my team. People management, I have a producer. I don't have a lot of directs, thankfully, because I wouldn't have a lot of time. But giving them an opportunity to grow is super important. For me, one thing I should have mentioned earlier, and this is very important with this people management at Microsoft, for me, is whenever I hire someone, especially at a senior band, I always hire that person with the intent that they're replacing me. And that's my bar. I won't make the hire as great a candidate is if I don't feel like in a reasonable amount of time, and I mean like 2 to 3 years or so, they can replace me. And some of that, you enter that with the mindset of like, well, they're not ready today, but they'll be ready in 2 to 3 years. And some of it might be, sometimes it's, well, they're ready like day one, right? And I just need to like give them the opportunity. People management at Turn 10 for me is the same thing. So I have a producer, I have a senior producer opening that that I've been interviewing for, and I know that the recruiters over there get really upset at me sometimes because I'm just like nope. I talked to so many people, and it's no, and it's because of that bar. And then of course when I tell other people, they're like, oh my God, are you leaving in 2 to 3 years? I'm like, no, but I want to make sure that there's somebody in there that could take my place, because with all the travel I do, you never know what could happen. We are supposed to be the publishing experts in our studio. The team that I joined has been around for quite a while. There's a 30-year vet on the team that has been in games for that long. He's shipped like tons of titles. Interesting tidbit on him without naming his name. He has a spreadsheet where he tracks every title that he's ever worked on over those 30 years and how much revenue it's made. And I'm like, hey, like, too bad you didn't get kickbacks because you'd be rich. No, he's, but I work with people like that on that team. People have been around for a very long time. An art director, design director, technical director, audio director. Are there audio people here? No? Okay. Yeah.
Some kids do some audio, but
yeah. And then the producers on the team. So, and then the last thing is really production excellence within the studio. So right now, Turn 10 has lots of producers, not as many as we had at Bungie, but we have tons of producers. Most of them don't interact with me at all, like on a day-to-day basis, because they're working on Motorsport or working on Forza Street, which just got announced, so I could say that. And any other number of central teams, right? We have central tech-focused teams that do like central engineering for our game engine, all that kind of stuff. So I don't interact with many of them on a day-to-day basis, but I still provide mentorship and guidance to those to those producers and make myself available to them. And usually do a lot of ad hoc one-on-ones especially if there's a new producer who joins in. I'll usually spend like at least the first 6 months checking in on them once a month or so, just see how they're doing, how they're acclimating to the studio, especially if they're new to production all up, like if they're getting what they need in order to succeed. So I do that. I don't have to, but like, production to me is super, super important. And with that, that's it. So any questions about Dave? You raise your hand first.
Yes, thank you. So what is the number one best thing that one can do in a producer or producer-esque role to help a small team ship? And by small, I mean like 5 or less. Like really
Right.
small. Indie.
So I think, and this is the case with really any size team, but the number one thing that you could do to help the team ship is ensure that everyone has clarity on the goals of what you're trying to achieve, right? And that everyone is driving toward the same end, right? In terms of, do we all understand like why we're doing the thing that we're doing? And does everyone understand their role in doing that? I think that that's the number one thing, especially for small teams, where what ends up happening a lot, depending on the makeup of the small team, if it's cross-disciplinary, everyone kind of like meets together very briefly and then just goes off, and then they don't see or talk to each other again because they're doing their own disciplines stuff, and then they come back together again in a week or two, and then constantly making sure that everyone understands what the end goal is really important, and also telling the team how we're progressing toward that. So.
Right, thank you.
What kind of project management tools do you recommend learning for like especially young producers who are starting?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So I'll just give you. So over my time as a producer, I've worked with Handsoft, TFS, which is now something else. It's called something else. Jira, and MS Project. I would say, from what I've seen working with, especially when I was at EA and when I was at Bungie, working with a lot of other Activision studios on Destiny stuff, I would say Jira is a good one. I think it's free for the first like 5 users or something like that. It's a good project management type of tool to get into and to learn just how it works, and how to manage a small project within it. Even if you're doing a solo project, it's good to use something like that. Me personally, whatever tool the company has, I just adopt to, because at the end of the day, they're all pretty similar, except MS Project is very different from any other tool I just mentioned. Whatever tool the company has, when I need to get acclimated to it, I actually create my own tiny project, and I use that as my day-to-day scheduler of things I need to remind myself of. So I give myself a personal board or space to work in there, and it helps me get to know the tool better. Somebody there was.
How do you negotiate property tax, like negotiations
In contracts?
Yeah, how do you
That's
negotiate something?
That's a really great question. In my time as a producer, I've been exposed to helping drive and write contracts for music licensing, for working with external vendors, and for licensing of other types of assets and tools, middleware, etc., for our games or features. That one's a little bit tougher, right? It really depends on the situation. Like for example, with music, there's a lot of levers you can pull. You can say, hey, I only want to use this song in the game at this moment, which is cheaper than saying I want to use the song in the intro of the game, like on this entry of the game, and I want to use it for marketing materials such as trailers and stuff like that. Like the cost just keeps going up, so you have to figure out like what's really important to you, right? Same thing with vendors, working with external partners. There's some levers that you pull there, right? Everyone work for hire studios always approach working with you as here's our man month cost, how many man months we need, so the total price is X. You can pull some levers there too, where you work like in a dev advance model with royalties, for example, where it's like, hey, look, I'm going to give you $50K up front, and I'm also going to give you 5% royalties capped at $1 million, let's say hypothetically, and you're going to reduce your man month cost by like 40%, right? It adds risk to the developer, and it also helps mitigate risk that you have, because if it doesn't work out, then you're not paying as much, right? So yeah, you just have to kind of figure out which ones are the right approaches for the type of thing that you want. You were next.
So, do you ever like face issues with trying to keep people's like productivity up over the course of like a longer scale project? Like, do you?
Oh yeah, definitely, all the time. For me, I like to split things up. So, taking a step back, say for example, like my time on Madden, it's only a year, but realistically, the production timeline is only 6 months. So there's a lot to do in 6 months, and so when you include shutting down the game, it's like another 9. It's like another 3 months after that. So it's 9 months total end to end, and the people will get burned out because when you're working on an annual release, there's no break for the most part. Like as soon as the game ships, even before the game ships, you're already working on concept for next year. So what I did on Madden, well, like actually one of the first things I did when we were developing our plans for Madden 12 was to put in breaks for my team. So social breaks. So we would like take a day and not come to work and we'd go golfing, or take a day or go bowling, or to like basically I would work to build a consensus on what people would want to do, and then we'd go do that thing instead of coming into work that day. It's kind of like a take a step back refresher. We're not talking about work. We're just having fun and bonding as a team. And if people couldn't make it or didn't want to go, it was totally fine for them to just take the day off. And it's just like not part of their PTO that they're using. It's just like, all right, well, you don't have to come. You can just take the day off, but please just relax, take a day, etc. And I've done that everywhere I've been because I think it breaks up the grind that we're constantly going through. Because making games is obviously really hard, and it also lets creative juices flow. When I was at Bungie, one more example, when I was first brought in there, I was given this opportunity to try to build a new cultural initiative at the studio. Old Bungie, back in like the early Halo days, they were a much smaller company, right? Like I think Halo 2 even shipped with like maybe 100 people-ish or so, 100 or 150, or 120. And everybody knew everybody. Everybody worked on a lot of little side projects too, to help with their creative juices or learning technical things, etc. And then when Bungie spun off and built Destiny, they just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. By the time I left there was 700 of us, 720, something like that. So it's huge. So in order to kind of bring that scale back down to a company where people knew everybody and also had a nice break to really re-energize and reinvigorate. What I proposed was right after the holidays, Christmas, New Year's holiday period, we would come back to the studio and spend a week offline working on basically the best way I could put it is a game jam, but it wasn't a game jam. I didn't want it to be a game jam. I wanted it to be, you could take the week to do whatever you want that is going to benefit you as an individual, either learning something new, etc., or get your creative juices going and like, build a game prototype or build whatever you want. But none of it was to pitch a new game at Bungie, right? That's what game jams are a lot of times. And so I worked really hard to get approval from the various other project leads at Bungie and studio leadership to shut down the studio for a week. As you can imagine, that's a lot of lost productivity for 700 people. But it worked. We did it, and it was a huge success. I remember when we started, people were just like, "I don't get this thing. Like, is it a game jam? Not a game jam? I don't know if I want to do anything, etc." And as we got closer and closer to it, we had a lot of people sign up for it. And by the time the first time we did it kicked off, we had, I think it was like 70% participation in the studio to do this thing. and people built all kinds of crazy projects. Like, of course, there was a typical VR stuff. There was a typical game prototypey stuff. But there was a group that kicked off a bungee yarn club. So they spent that time working with yarn and creating crafts and stuff like that. So yeah, that was my way of doing that at Bungee.
You guys, I think we're good for maybe one more question, and then I'm sure you'll stand here for a little while they
Yeah, I can.
ask. Yeah, I
Yeah.
can.
As a producer, what do you have to kind of say when you're working on it? So like artists have the artwork, 3D models, programmers have coding. As a producer, what is your like show of contribution to the project?
That's a great question. I think I said this like 30, 40 minutes ago. We do nothing. So I think at the end of the day, for what I'm most proud of is when we ship the product. Like at the end of the day, you're always going to ship the product for the most part. I've not shipped the product before, but like the thing for me though is, did we ship it in a way where my team felt empowered, where they felt that they were well taken care of, and where they walked out of that with like still wanting to be there at that company. Because a lot of times when you ship a product, the one thing you'll see in games is like people just take off. They're like, cool, I'm burned out from this place. I spent 5 years doing this project, or 3 years, or whatever the case was. I'm done. I want to go take another opportunity somewhere else. And for a company, that's like a massive loss of talent. Now, you could easily argue that like producers are just as valuable as anyone else, and you never want to lose a good producer. But for me, it's like, well, if you have a great artist or a great engineer or a great designer, etc., like you really don't want to lose those people because they're irreplaceable, and a lot of times they're taking tons of domain knowledge with them that never really got filtered down to the team very well or to other people across the studio, and that's a massive loss. So for me, it's did I create an environment where we were successful, we shipped, everybody's happy, and they're staying. That's the best way to put it.
That's your portfolio number, right? 80 people didn't leave after the game was shipped. That was. Just my question: are you on Twitter a lot?
I am on Twitter quite a bit. It ebbs and flows. When I travel a lot for my job, and so while I'm traveling, I spend a lot of time on Twitter.
There you go. I've been saying it. Thank you very much.